Athens 1987. The inauguration of the University Museum of Athens is taking place in the newly restored building, which for decades the Athenians called the Palio Panepistimio, or the Old University. 150 years have passed since May 3rd, 1837. On that day, under the shadow of the Acropolis, the University of King Otto, or as it is better known, the University of Athens, was founded. The university responded to the demand to contribute to the organization of the independent post-revolutionary Greek state. It would serve the fundamental visions and ideals of Greeks, their love of learning, national unity, and cultural expansion in the Greek East, and it would help man the state apparatus. There was a need for civil servants, legists, doctors, clergymen, and teachers. With these aims in mind, it was decided to set up the crowning institution in the educational pyramid. Shortly before this, the pragmatic Greek Prime Minister Kapodistrian had been insisting that the more urgent requirement was basic school education, a problem which still exists today, as the 150-year history of the university shows.
The university consists of 4 faculties or schools: theology, law, medicine and philosophy. The latter also includes the School of Physics and Mathematics. By the Foundation Charter of the 24th of April 1837, the university appointed 27 Greeks and 6 Germans as professors. The Greek professors came mainly from Greek centres still within Turkish-ruled areas or from émigré communities abroad.
52 students enrolled for the first year. 37 of them were graduates of the country's 3 high schools and were accepted without examinations. The curriculum, which was widely publicized in the capital, a small town of 15,000 inhabitants, was impressive in its broadness. Freedom fighters from all parts of Greece, men dressed in national costume, clergymen, merchants, and young schoolboys sat side by side on the benches and attended with great interest the public lectures which had been announced in the press. Although in 1838 43 students enrolled, and the following year only 24, the buildings did not provide enough room.
In May 1839, the plans of the Danish architect Hansen were approved, and in July of the same year the foundation stone was laid for the new university, which was to be built with the contributions of Greeks living in all parts of the world and of Philhellenes of all nations. People living on modest salaries, rich merchants, learned Greeks of the diaspora and of the Turkish-ruled Greek lands, clergymen, professionals of the Free State, all hastened to help. Especially some leaders of the war bands of the revolution gave their arms as a contribution, and the money that was finally raised met 1/6 of the total cost.
Professor Dimaras.
With every human historical phenomenon, we can discern 2 starting points. The first is direct, such as is expressed by some public act or some private initiative. The other belongs to the more distant past and appears only gradually. Today, we shall not talk about the long background to the formation of the university in Athens, but rather about the moment of its foundation and the immediate reasons for its foundation. I think that during those years from 1835 to 1837, the needs of our country were above all administrative. You see, Greece was a geographical unit that comprised a province of what was an Asian empire. From one day to the next, it had to acquire an administration and government, and at the same time an administration that was European. In other words, something completely different from the despotic Asian system which had existed up till then. Now Greece was taking the initiative, and it had to deal with a completely new situation. The first task was to set up ministries and to staff them. There had never been such a thing as a university in the Ottoman Empire. Thus, there had never been a way for education to be completed or more comprehensive, so that practical needs could be met. We're not just talking about the ability to read and write. Rather, there was no means to enrich people's vocabulary and knowledge of the language. We needed people with specialized knowledge concerning law to become lawyers, judges, legislators. We needed doctors for both public health concerns and for the health of individuals. We needed Greek language teachers to teach at the schools. And of course, we needed trained clerics who would be able to give religious instruction to a free people. These were needs that had to be met and taught at a higher level. In other words, at university level. However, in parallel with all this, and independently of all this, but as if to support these needs, there was an ideological current. People at the time considered it important that Greece looked towards the countries of southeastern Europe and Asia Minor, where there lived very large Greek communities, and that Greece should maintain the closest relations with these communities. Higher education had a role to play in this task as well. Thus, the university had a duty to prepare and train people, lawyers, doctors, teachers, who would go to the Greek communities, for the most part in Asia Minor and still under Turkish Ottoman rule, and thus provide an educated social stratum on which these Greek communities outside Greece could rely. They constituted, as it were, ambassadors of Greece within the still Turkish-ruled Greek areas. This comprised the governing ideology from 1833 onwards. And, in a speech at the time, someone said that once the East had enlightened the West, but that now it was the turn of the West to enlighten the East. Such sentiments are expressed in texts that I recently had the chance to read from 1837 and the foundation of the university. And later, in 1844, on January the 14th, Koletis, in his speech to an assembly, first used the term the Megali Idea, or the grand idea, for this whole political and cultural outlook towards the Greek world of Asia Minor. This outlook of the grand idea was to dominate for many years. These were the two main phenomena that underlied the decision to set up a university in Greece.
Each faculty or school, in the words of the Charter, has a fixed number of posts and is in itself an independent society of scholars as far as academic matters are concerned, and yet quite inseparable from the university's main body, remaining in perpetual association with it while having its own stamp. The constant increase in the university's population is a phenomenon that already appeared in the last century. the lack of classrooms and the small number of teaching staff made the introduction of entrance examinations necessary, as from the academic year 1927-28. This measure, however, did not affect the number of students that crowded the few teaching rooms. It took another 40 years for the state to go ahead with the creation of a university campus which would satisfy the needs of a higher education institute.
The prestige of being a student in 19th century Greek society was not due to class or geographical origin, which was in any case varied. Rather, it was associated with the leading social and political role they were being trained to play. From the time of its foundation, half a century had to pass before the first female student was accepted. The principal of the university had to seek approval from the Minister of Education so that Miss Ioanna Stefanopouli, the student, could be accepted by the School of Philosophy.
From the very beginning, the university faced serious difficulties. During the early years, the professors made a heroic effort to raise the university to the level of similar institutions in other more advanced countries. The university did not only serve as a training school for young academics, but also as a base for the ideological and intellectual unification of the fragmented Greek world. To meet social needs, it was necessary to have doctors, lawyers, teachers, and mathematicians, but even more urgent was the need for the creation of an intellectual body with the necessary knowledge and with a much-needed national outlook. Another serious problem was the limited qualifications of the students owing to the deficiencies in the secondary education system at that time. High schools were few, and teaching took place under difficult conditions. The basis which was thus offered by secondary education was not sufficient for the move to university.
The example of George Ianadios, a professor of history and philosophy, who left his post in order to teach in a high school, illustrates this point clearly. He explained, "If we all rush to university, who is going to be left for the schools? Alas for the edifice which has a solid roof, but foundations of clay." I resigned from the university to dedicate myself full-time to the high school. On the other hand, teachers in the university were also facing problems. Their own shortcomings, the lack of appropriate teaching rooms, and the almost total absence of equipment, books, and teaching aids. On its 50th anniversary, though, it was noted that the present situation of the university is neither simply good nor simply bad.
On the night of 3rd September 1843, crowds of people along with rebel units from the army surrounded the royal palace demanding a constitution. Among them were many students, inspired by those few teachers who had spoken of the virtues of constitutional regimes during their lectures, especially in the schools of law and philosophy. The 1844 Constitution provided for the first time some guarantees for individual freedom and equality of citizens. The National Assembly of the 3rd September, in recognition of the university's contribution to the country's political life, decided that the university should have its own deputy chosen among its professors.
The first student protest took place just 2 years after the foundation of the university. The medical students declared absence from lessons, demanding to be provided with teaching notes. Later in May 1859, students of all the faculties took the lead in a movement supporting efforts for the promotion of Greek products. There were violent clashes between students and police. The students' demands were accepted, and the chief of police was dismissed. This was the first victory for the student movement. Meanwhile, opposition to the monarchy was gaining strength. In September 1861, a student named Dosios attempted to assassinate Queen Amalia. Later on, the students were in the vanguard of the uprising against the crown. This uprising was successful. King Otto left Greece in May 1862. A few days after the overthrow of the king, the university is named national instead of royal. To safeguard the revolution and to maintain law and order, the university senate appointed a student patrol consisting of 850 students.
Professor de Maras.
In many cases, we see that the students followed a course which they considered to be in our national interest, but which did not agree with the course that the political leadership of the time was following. Thus, during the final years of King Otto's reign, with the funeral of Manousis, with the promotion of Greek products, and finally with the overthrow of the monarchy, in which the students played an important role, the university authorities, of course, had not expected such things to have been engendered within its own walls. School and university teaching had therefore also played an important role in the uprising against the monarchy and in the formation of a national outlook. For many years afterwards, and right up to the years of the reign of King George of Greece, during which there was considerable political vacillation, the university and its students adopted a very active role. In 1873, a group of students occupied the university building and were then besieged by the army and police. Eventually, they came out, unharmed, but the whole episode was discussed in Parliament. Lombardos spoke in Parliament about the political asylum that the premises of the university provided, and said that if the state did not change its position towards the student population, then the situation would reach extremities never seen before, and that if up to then there had not been any deaths in the clashes between state and students, then it was possible there would be deaths in the future.
It was inevitable that both tutors and students of Athens University would get involved in heated debate between the followers of Dimotiki, that is the colloquial Greek language, and the followers of Katharevousa, the official language, a purist idiom based on ancient Greek forms used by scholars. A large faction of the students gathered around Professor George Mistriotis and the followers of Hellenism, who believed that the country's glory lay in the past and that Greece ought to revive the ancient language, art and morals. Violent demonstrations and clashes with mounted police broke out in front of the university's entrance, and the students were in the front line. An initiative of Queen Olga commissioning the translation of part of the Gospel into Demotic modern Greek triggered off the crisis. Part of the contemporary press saw in this scheming by the Russian-born queen and branded the Demoticists atheists, traitors and agents of the Slavic cause. The demonstrators protested angrily against the unholy translation, and the clashes had their toll of dead and injured. Religious motives and the reaction against Slavic nationalism fueled fanaticism surrounding the language question.
Along with the construction of the main university building, there were plans for a library. In 1840, there were already 15,000 volumes collected, bought or donated. In 1860, there was a merger of the University Library and the public libraries, resulting in the National Library, which occupied the upper floor of the university. In 1903, the library was transferred to an adjoining neoclassical building where it is still today.
In 1837, there were 3 tutors for every 8 students in the Faculty of Theology. The faculty played a leading role in academic, national and church matters. Being a bridge between science and religion, it tried to fight superstition and fanaticism, and it was the only center of theological studies for Orthodox Christianity in the Balkans and Russia. It had, of course, ardent opponents, such as Apostolos Makrakis, who called it the Devil's Nest. In 1976, the faculty was transferred to the new university campus. Today, it is still the only university theology faculty in the world for the Orthodox Church, and recently it acquired a new department called Pastoral, with the special purpose of preparing qualified members of clergy, laymen and monks to revive and fill ecclesiastical posts in the Orthodox Church.
Another cornerstone of the newly founded university was the School of Philosophy, that is the arts faculty. By today's standards, the proportion of tutors to students during the first year of the School of Philosophy seems incredible. 14 tutors per 18 students. The first dean of the frequently dubbed School of the Demigods was the clergyman Neophytos Vamvas, who started his intellectual career at the side of Korais, perhaps the most important intellectual figure from the years of the Greek Revolution. In Vamvas' inaugural lecture, he described the faculty's aims. Our school is to educate youth in literature, both Greek and Latin, in archaeology, history, mathematics, physics, chemistry, oratory, and in human and moral philosophy. The teaching and study of Greek literature and the humanities comprise the core of the faculty's program. However, many problems still remained. Often the study of classical texts, as was the case in all European universities, was confined to the study of grammar and syntax, ignoring the ideas and the world they portrayed. Instead of serving as a foundation for research and intellectual edification, it seldom moved beyond the function of a purely professional school.
During the past 150 years, there have been many disputes and conflicts over the aims and the scope of the education provided by the School of Philosophy. However, many leading literary figures have taught in its lecture rooms, figures who left their mark on the intellectual and ideological quests of the new Greek state.
The School of Philosophy has now been transferred from the small building of classical studies in central Athens to its own building on the new Athens University campus. It looks grand and imposing, but it lacks the warmth of the old building, the rooms of which have been the starting point for many ideological and intellectual struggles. It is hoped that the new building will become a different type of centre for the exchange of ideas and knowledge, such as will meet the needs of every new generation. In October 1984, the School of Philosophy was divided into 6 departments: philology, history and archaeology, which includes history of art, philosophy, teacher training and psychology, and finally the departments of French, English and German language and literature. The ceremonial hall of the faculty is designed for lectures, conferences and cultural events, as well as being above all a forum for teachers and students alike for the discussion of ideas and problems concerning education as a whole.
The fundamental function of the school is, of course, to serve the humanities and to prepare and train new teachers for secondary education. That is, those who will teach languages, literature, history, philosophy, and psychology. The school here, as in other universities, provides education and training for the country's archaeologists and for young academics and researchers in classical, Byzantine, and modern Greek literature. Another of his functions is to provide teacher training and to teach educational psychology to students of other faculties of the university.
However, besides its official purpose of educating and training teachers for Greek schools nationwide and abroad, the faculty also hopes to develop and raise the standards and quality of the human sciences. In this age of technology and positive sciences, the School of Philosophy is called upon to serve humanist ideas and is passing through difficult times, as are other arts departments, because of the technological and sometimes mechanistic view of modern life. It is precisely here wherein the significance and the responsibility of the school lies. By serving letters and the arts, it strives to unite the nation's past with the present in a dynamic way, to unite tradition with innovation, and if possible, to use what we may learn from the past to help the new generation look forward to the future.
The Department of History and Archaeology has two main branches. A. History, and B. Archaeology and History of Art. With a specialization in history, the student has the opportunity to study certain periods of the past in greater depth and to learn various methods of historical approach. The Department of Archaeology and History of Art, covering the needs of practical training, provides students with the opportunity to take part in excavations carried out in various parts of mainland Greece and the islands.
In the newly founded university, physics and mathematics were part of the School of Philosophy, following the German system, which considered these sciences as comprising a part of philosophy in its broadest sense. Dr. Xavier Landerer was appointed first professor of chemistry in the new university. He wrote the first chemistry course books and set up the first laboratory. The novelty of chemistry as a subject meant that it drew the biggest audiences, mostly for the fun of watching the experiments. However, Anastasios Christomanos is considered to be the founder of modern Greek chemistry. He was appointed in 1863 and 5 years later was promoted to senior lecturer of experimental and analytical chemistry. From 1886, with the appointment of Christomanos as professor of experimental chemistry, the chemistry laboratory started to function, albeit on a limited basis. In 1887, the foundation stone for the laboratory was laid, and Christomanos himself supervised its construction. During his chancellorship, the decision was taken to separate the Department of Physics and Mathematics, a decision which was finally put into effect in 1903-4. During the 40 years of Christomanos' service to the university, teaching and research in the field of chemistry reached international standards. The successor to Christomanos in the chair of general chemistry was Konstantinos Engelis, he who had been a professor of physics and chemistry. Another important development for the faculty took place in 1912, when the chair of general chemistry was divided into two, organic and inorganic chemistry. In 1919, an independent department of chemistry was established for the study of analytical and industrial chemistry. In 1922, a chair of the history of natural sciences was set up, and it was the first and for many years the only one of its kind in the world. Many new branches within the field of chemistry were set up in the laboratories of the chemistry department. For example, environmental chemistry, oceanographic chemistry, bioinorganic catalysis, kinetic methods of analysis, and ion kinetic electrodes. At the same time, a chair of food chemistry and an associated laboratory were set up. This laboratory not only serves the university, but also public health control.
In 1843, the Principal Asopius asked the state to support natural history studies. Following that, presentations were made to the government by professors. They stressed the need for research into Greek natural environment and that the university should contribute to the development of industry and productive forces in general. The profusion of scientific ideas in Europe had a direct effect on the Greek academic world. Nevertheless, it was 50 years before the first physics laboratory was set up in the basement of what was then the new chemistry department building, and which functioned as a laboratory of experimental physics right up until 1911. From 1911 onwards, modern laboratories were set up, with separate areas for lab equipment, lab assistants to prepare experiments, and adequate electrical and gas installations. 10 years later, the laboratory was updated with more modern equipment, and papers and publications appeared on the research and experiments carried out there.
In 1919, the chemistry department was made into an independent department, and in 1935, the physics department was divided into two, the natural history department and the physics department. Thus, the physics department took on its modern form, that is, a department which had as its object of study the field of physics. From 1953 to 1974, Professor Michael Anastasiadis developed electrical engineering. In 1981, the physics department was incorporated into the Faculty of Positive Sciences. In this room, they carry out tests in applied optics, in which they conduct controls on lens quality and on light polarizing materials. Here we see them conducting a holographic experiment as part of the Applied Optics course. Holography is a modern method of total visual recording of an object, or more correctly, of an object's light. The recording is made on a special film, while the light source is a laser. When the film is developed, the hologram appears. When the hologram is lit up in the correct way, a full stereoscopic image of the object is produced, which has three-dimensional depth. In other words, the object has different perspectives if we look at it from different positions. The team of optical, electronic and optical communications researchers have been involved since 1970 in researching applications for lasers. In recent years, the team has been studying digital communications by means of fiber optics.
The astronomy department has a Zeiss telescope equipped with equatorial bearings and astrostat so that the movement of the stars can be followed with sufficient accuracy. In the astrophysics department, the students develop photographic plates. This material is a faithful copy of photographs that have been taken in Australia with the assistance of the Anglo-Australian Observatory. With simple instruments and calculations, the students can find the stellar magnitudes as well as distances between stars and planets.
Since the academic year 1986-7, the Physics Department, in collaboration with the Mathematics Department, has set up an interdepartmental programme for computer and communication studies. The first lecturers of the Physics and Mathematics departments endeavoured to raise the level of the courses to European standards. These efforts were slow and uneven. The first university course book for mathematics was a 5-volume work, which was published under difficult publishing conditions, when most of the teaching staff still taught from handwritten notes. In 1982, the department was divided into the following sections: pure and applied mathematics, algebra, geometry and applications, computer statistics, arithmetical analysis, and business studies.
The School of Medicine was one of the first 4 faculties of the university when it was set up in 1837. The first dean was Athanasios Georgiadis Lefkias. 3 scientific bodies of the newly established Greek state had prepared the ground for the founding of the Faculty of Medicine and for its future development. The first was the Medical Convention, the highest state body for public health. The second was the Theoretical and Practical Teaching Establishment for Surgery, Pharmacy and Medicine, through which many of the first teaching staff of the faculty had passed. And thirdly, there was the Athens Medical Society, the longest functioning scientific body of modern Greece. The first graduate of the School of Medicine was Yannis Anastasios Goudas in 1843. By 1862, the year that King Otto was expelled from the throne, 352 had graduated from the school. The medical training system adopted in the School of Medicine throughout the 19th century was heavily influenced by the German medical system and practice.
At the time that the School of Medicine was founded, the number of Greeks in medicine was small and medical practice was far from unified. There were doctors who had been in practice from the time of the Greek Revolution and War of Independence in 1821, experienced doctors who had permits granted by the government, Philhellene doctors who remained in Greece after the successful uprising against the Turks, and Greek doctors trained abroad who now were returning to their homeland from Europe and other areas of the Greek diaspora. The lack of laboratories and hospitals in the early years of the Greek state meant that the teaching of medicine was almost exclusively theoretical, so much so in fact that one historian of the period wrote that graduates of the School of Medicine are more philosophers of medicine than trained medical doctors because they lack the scientific provisions for acquiring practical knowledge. For this reason, the well-off chose to go to foreign universities to supplement their studies after graduating at the medical school in Athens. In its 150-year history, the School of Medicine has not been only associated with an unbroken and arduous educational task, with hospital work and scientific contributions, but has also had an important social role. A large number of its graduates have been a source of pride for Greece, and many have contributed to the international prestige of the school. Today, the old School of Medicine is called the School of Hygiene Science and comprises 4 departments. That is the Department of Medicine, the Department of Dental Medicine, of Pharmaceutical Medicine and of Clinical Medicine. The Department of Medicine is by far the biggest, with 4,500 students. For training and research, the department provides laboratories, clinics, study areas, museums and hospitals.
the linear accelerator is a new machine for radiotherapy with which we can direct the X-rays to the desired point with millimeter accuracy, thus protecting the healthy tissue around the growth that is being treated. Also, since each radiotherapy dose is very quick, there are no mistakes owing to any movement of the patient. There are also sophisticated techniques for avoiding any damage to benign tissue from radiotherapy, such as with bone marrow, the eyes, and so on. Because of the computer-guided system of the radiotherapy equipment, the rays are directed to the affected part of the patient's body with a high degree of accuracy. This means that the dose of rays directed to the tumor is maximized, while at the same time the accuracy prevents healthy tissue from being damaged.
At the Aratean Hospital, a digital blood vessel scanner has been in operation for 2 years, and in that space of time over 3,000 tests of every kind have been carried out on patients. The digital blood vessel scanner has the capability of carrying out all intra-arterial examinations with a catheter probe when greater detail is required, as well as performing all selective and investigative examinations of arteries and vessels. The digital scanner is a new method for studying the blood vessels. Scanning is possible by injecting an agent into the bloodstream which shows up on the scanner. The machine, in reading the scan, eliminates all the other tissue from the image so that only vessels and arteries remain to be seen. The cost of the examination is less than with the older system of blood vessel scanning. The test is recorded on computer and can be analysed and printed out after the patient has left.
Pharmaceutical studies in Greece began in 1835 with the setting up of a theoretical and practical teaching establishment for surgery, pharmacy and medicine. In 1838, a chair of pharmacology was set up in the University School of Medicine, which awarded diplomas. And later, a pharmaceutical school was established under the control of the Dean of the School of Medicine. From 1872 and for a further 50 years, the students were trained in the basement of the Kostis Palamas building in central Athens. Today, the pharmaceutical department of the School of Hygiene Science caters for 3 fields and has nearly 1,000 students. Second in rank in 1837 was the law school. At its opening, the dean, George Rallis, remarked that our laws are in part those of West Germany, and he set forth the curriculum for the law studies. The law school set itself the task of teaching citizens' duties and citizens' rights, and the various courses aim to instruct the great art of administering nations, the art of preventing the oppression of the weak by the strong, and of the honest by the cunning, the art of how all may cooperate, whether weak or strong, whether rich or poor, the art of encouraging trade and industry and preserving good faith, and finally the art of how to live freely and well governed. The law school was based on foreign models in order to codify Greek institutions. The professors adapted the liberal codes of Western societies to the needs of the newly founded Greek state, following the ideas of the intellectual Korais for the transferal in the field of education of ideas from a foreign cultural sphere to the Greek. The law school, as it was natural, was not only influenced by the turbulent life of Greece, but also in its turn influenced that life to a great degree. Gradually, a national science of law developed, and it made a major contribution to legislation. Without the law school, the great codifications would have been unthinkable. The civil code, the penal code, the code of civil procedure and others. It educated interpreters of law as well as of those involved in the enforcement of justice. In many ways, it dominated through its graduates the political life of the country. On the other hand, The liberal and progressive ideas of some of the law school professors provoked the hostility of various governments throughout its history. The closing down of the law school and the prosecution of professors happened for the first time in 1848 and has occurred on a number of occasions since in the 20th century up to the time of the colonel's dictatorship in 1967.
The history of economics in Greece begins officially with the establishment of the university in 1837. Within the organisation of the law school, a chair of political economy was set up, and in 1867 a chair of public finance. An important phase in the history of economic science was the professorship of Andreas Andreadis, Professor of Public Finance and Statistics from 1904 to 1935. At the same time, the science of political economy was gaining independence from the law school. This culminated in 1980 in an autonomous economics department being incorporated into the School of Law and Political Science. Gradually, the so-called neoclassical school has prevailed, although recently it has had to face attacks from other schools of more contemporary thought. The fact that the school plays host to many currents of academic thought may better lead to creative ideas that can confront more fully the problems of contemporary life.
The independent and self-governing Department of Political Science and Public Administration essentially began in 1982. In 1985, two sections were set up in the department, that of Political Science and Mass Communications, and that of Administration and International Relations. In the field of political science, there are courses such as Introduction to the Legal System, Sociology, the Constitutional System, Statistics, and the History of Political Economy. Within the curriculum of Communication Studies are courses on political communication and printed and electronic information and communication. Within the curriculum of International and European Studies are courses on international relations and public international law, the European Community, communication law and others. Besides holding postgraduate seminars, the department has a fourth course comprising administration and self-administration studies.